Well, hey everybody, I'm here with Patrick Gravier, the BVM technician that's been helping us all out for a few years now.
Sometimes known as savon-pat.
Yep, on your eBay store. Thank you so much for doing this. We did the audio interview over Skype, over Skype.
It was on the phone,
back.
right?
And those never come out as good. There's always a delay, and I always feel so bad talking over people because of that, half a second. So this is great. We're here in this lab, which is making me very jealous. Even though I have a few of these monitors myself, it's very cool to see all this stuff in action right here. So you have quite the history with monitors and television and everything. I've heard that you've worked at a CRT plant. We all know about your skills calibrating and repairing. Where did you get started with all this?
My father, who was a sheet metal worker when I was young, also did TV repair. He was basically a tube jockey, they called him in those days.
Mm-hmm.
He'd go to people's houses and change tubes and fix their TV sets. I became half interested, and it just so happens I was about 15 years old, and through my father, he mentioned that he had a son and at the electronic parts store that he bought his parts at. And they hired me at 15. I worked part-time after school until I got out of high school, as a matter of fact. And I worked a short time after that. So that was kind of my background in parts, if you will. Mm-hmm. So I knew a transistor, which was new then, from a tube, which we sold a lot of. And that kind of started it. I then spent a couple of years in college. Then the Army came and got me in the early 60s. I was drafted. I spent time at the Pentagon, and I was a cryptographer. I then was transferred out to Sylvania's Electronics Defense Laboratories in Palo Alto. I was there for a while, and then they opened up Electromagnetic Systems Laboratories in Palo Alto, and I was one of the 25 people that when they started that company with Dr. Perry, who later became a national security advisor to the president.
Oh, wow.
I wish I'd have stayed there, because it grew from 25 people to over 20,000, and the stock at that time was nothing, which I could have bought, but I didn't. And at any rate, I came home, I finished up in Palo Alto, went to Stanford University, spent some time there, and then came back to Southern California with my wife and my children, and finished up school at Cypress College, electrical engineering. Then I kind of did several things. I went to work for another electronic parts distributor, ran that for a while. Then I became a factory representative for B&K Precision, the test equipment manufacturer. Mm-hmm. I gave seminars on how to use their product, how to use a CRT tester to the TV dealers in those days.
It's rare that you have somebody that has such an in-depth knowledge of stuff that's also able to give the presentations. It's a fine skill.
Sure. And then later, in later years, I owned a rep firm that sold electronic parts to electronic parts distributors. Then I became national sales manager for an importer that imported all types of electronics. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started traveling to China and Taiwan. Then after that, I bought an electronic parts distributor in Garden Grove, California. It's called Savon Electronics. That's where the savon-pat came from.
Yeah.
Then I sold that and to a Chinese gentleman who ran the business in the ground very shortly. But then I went to work in Garden Grove at Sony and I was writing reports on monitor problems. When they couldn't fix one or whatever, then I would jump in there and figure it out and write a report for it. And then along came gaming. And I retired shortly after that in around 2002. Retired and was really not into electronics at all. I was traveling and doing other things, and up and coming, a guy came to me and said, "Can you fix this Sony monitor?" And I said, "Yeah, I know that thing inside and out." And I fixed it in about 10 minutes for him, and he was duly impressed. And he says, "I use this for gaming." And I said, "Gaming?" And the only game I ever played was in television, I think. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm really not a gamer, and so I thought that was kind of interesting. And one thing led to another, and then I started buying a few monitors because they were so cheap. I remember I was buying these little 8010 VCR using the little 8mm and a little 8-inch monitor. I was buying those for $10 and selling them, fixing them, which was nothing, and selling them for $100, $200. And I thought, hey, this keeps Mama shopping at the supermarket. Or not the supermarket, but at the May Company and Nordstrom and those kind of places. So that was good. And then one thing led to another, and I just started servicing more and more for people. And I thought, I remember a marketing professor in college, and he said, never get an increasing share of a decreasing market. And that has stuck with me for years. And here I am, I'm getting an increasing share of a decreasing market. But it's not really decreasing. It seems to be growing, which is kind of a fascinating thing. It's old, but it's growing.
I liken this, and in fact, it's taken almost identical path to classic cars. So, that 69 Camaro, by the time the early 80s hit, that was just an old car. And then by the time the late 90s hit, that was a classic that every car nut wanted. And now they're just going up and up in price. So I think it's pretty much becoming identical to that. And I think it's especially true for things like CRTs, that you cannot recreate the experience, at least not for the foreseeable future, on a flat screen. I think for things like the game consoles themselves, VCRs, Laserdisc players, you're getting to a place where you can recreate that, but in order to see it the same way you need to see it on the CRT. And it's something that's so hard. I've always tried to find a good way to explain it to people. And the best I could come up with is that when you're looking at a CRT, the scan lines create a depth to the games, and even to certain, certain 480i TV shows, but more so on the gaming because of the thick scan lines. And it's not something I've ever seen accurately reproduced. They have flat screens that you could have fake scan lines on that, it's okay, but it's just it's not the same. So I think it's something that's becoming, once people realize the difference, it's becoming more important to them.
Yeah, I had somebody contacted me from London and wanted me to come and visit them and talk about their monitors. They have about 600 CRT monitors that they, I think, put into museums and do whatever with. But they were more concerned with how do they keep them for the next 100 years. What can they do to them to make them stay good?
Yeah, that's a great question. Is there anything that you could offer to people that already have them?
Not that I'm aware of. I have never really thought hard about that. Obviously, the capacitors are the heart. That's what makes a monitor what it is, really. And that's the one item that deteriorates. Everything else in there is good almost forever, but the caps go bad. So if it comes time, I think it's just a matter of getting the caps for those models, which is going to be a problem. I think in the future, buying capacitors is going to be a problem. They're not going to make them forever.
Right.
I would say that 25 years from now, you couldn't buy a 10 mic 50 volt cap. Who's going to make them? What are they for? There's nothing that you can buy today that needs a radial lead electrolytic capacitor.
I never thought of that. I never looked at it from that perspective. That's a scary thought.
Yeah, it is. But everything is surface mounted or less. Nobody uses a really component level product anymore. And as far as servicing anything electronic now, if you look at the inside of your flat screen TV, there's 3 or 4 circuit boards, and you might find some electrolytics on the power supply, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So everything else is surface mounted, and like I say, it's going to be tough in the future. So.
Other basic tips for preservation, I would assume it's the basics, like try to keep it out of a super humid place, unplug it when you're not using it just in case of power surge, just basic electronics tips for preservation.
Yeah, those are helpful things. To me, the killer on any monitor is heat. The cooler you can keep it, the better. I encourage people to, if they don't have one installed in it, to install a fan in the back of their monitor. There's room. You can take the back off of most monitors. You can cut a hole in the back and mount a little muffin fan that's quiet. And believe me, that will help more than anything.
This might sound like a stupid question, but do you recommend an intake or an exhaust fan?
Oh, always exhaust. You want to get rid of the heat. So make sure you have an inlet somewhere, preferably on the bottom, or on the bottom edge or the sides. But you want to exhaust the heat out. Never blow something in.
The only reason I asked that is because in the company that I used to work for that did medical grade computers, we had to have things in a very tight place, as sealed as possible, and we did the opposite once. We took cool air from the outside, routed it through, and blew it over the hot components through an exhaust chamber going out. But that was a specialty case designed specifically for that. That wasn't,
Well, again, in medical situations are normally much cleaner.
Yeah. And you have to account for spillage and sprays and,
Right.
even just a bleach spray, whereas I hope nobody would think to clean their monitors with a bleach spray. So.
Right, exactly.
But, yeah, so just an exhaust fan. I think with the amount of space that's inside of your average PVM and BVM, it seems like a very easy thing to add for even a beginner.
Absolutely. And they draw so little current, you can pull 5 volts or 12 volts off of it in many places in a monitor, so it's not a real chore to do.
Now, for people who have capacitor issues on their monitors, you do offer both the service for the cards, for BVMs. You sell kits online. I think you even sell, depending on the model, refurbished cards for people that need them. But for anything past that, so if somebody has a monitor that they've bought the cap replacement, but it's not still working properly, what do you think the next best step to do in a situation like that?
If the cap kit doesn't repair the monitor, there's really 2 things left. One is obviously in a BVM it's going to be the power supply, which goes bad but rarely. The second, of course, is the CRT. And you either have 2 choices. You can take the monitor to a TV type dealer that has a hopefully B&K precision tester. He can test the CRT for you. If it's bad, then you've got junk. The cost of the tube is too expensive to replace today. If the power supply, in fact, is bad, and the only way to find that out is to stick it in another monitor, which is, it's dumb simple to do, but for a lot of people that don't have another monitor, that's an impossibility. I offer, if someone sends me a module, like a BVM module, a power supply specifically, if they send it to me, I'll test it in one of my monitors, the same model that they have. If it's good, I'll send it back to them. I don't charge anything for it. They're just going to pay the shipping. So if they don't mind doing that, I don't mind helping out.
That's wonderful.
If it's bad, if the power supply doesn't work, then I can fix the power supply, and I charge $150. I repair any module for $150. If it has a part that is no longer available, which is rare, I think I've come upon it once every year or 2. That's a whole different story. Then I'll contact the customer and say, hey, I do have a replacement. It's going to be $150 or $200 or whatever the part happens to be. But that's probably the easiest way to go. For the person that doesn't really have the ability to test anything, I encourage them to take out all the modules, not the input modules. I don't need what I need is the ISR module, which is the input or the first module on the left on BVMs. The power supply, the vertical, or the deflection module, and the video module. They pull those 4 out, ship them to me. Normally I charge between $4 and $4.50, and then I ship them back after they're serviced at no charge. I insert them into one of my test monitors, and with the ISR module, I'm then able to calibrate the monitor so that I'm loading all of the modules into the ISR module. That's where the memory chips is. So when you get them back, you just slide them all in, and within reason, the monitor is going to be pretty well calibrated, both color and geometry.
So I never realized that what you're calibrating to is the combination of the cards inside the monitor. I thought it was somehow calibrating to maybe the deflection board running through the CRT itself.
Well, it does. It does control the deflection board. That's part of what the ISR module does. And depending on the chip that you have in the monitor, that is really what tells these modules what to do effectively.
So if you have the modules calibrated to itself, that's half the calibration right
Oh,
there,
it's all
right?
of the calibration. The only thing that's left is the small magnetics that are involved with the CRT, which is going to throw one corner off a little bit perhaps, or make a little bend or a little bow, which you can then go in and make fine adjustments to take care of that. But as far as the color level, as long as the CRT is within reason good, it's going to fire right off, and the color should be extremely accurate.
Wow. I never looked at it like that. Maybe everybody else does, and this was just a personal ignorance here, but I always assumed that when you calibrate things like geometry and color, you're calibrating that specific tube that you're hooked up to.
You're telling the tube what to do.
Oh, and when the different modules talk to each other, that's the calibration. So now they're able to communicate well, so that sends the proper signal out to the TV, or to the tube itself.
And I'm not saying that that's going to be perfect. There's going to be little adjustments that you may have to do. As far as the color goes, the color for games is not as important as somebody that's finishing a film for a movie.
Very true.
So the color accuracy could be off a fraction, but you would never see it in a game. As far as the geometry now, you can see that. You can hit 0.95 on a BVM, and you're going to see a crosshatch pattern, and if it's not squared up, you can see it. Those are minute adjustments you can make. But 9 times out of 10, when they get them back after they're completely calibrated, they're going to throw it on there, and it's going to be so close they don't care. It could be off a little bit, but rarely.
I think that one fear that most beginners have for things like this is anybody that's tried to calibrate a CRT for the first time knows that you could try, or even a projector, if you get one side perfect, the other side goes off, and then you go to that other side, and then the side you were just working on. So I do think that many people who haven't tried this before might get a little nervous saying, hey, this is 99% good enough. I don't want to mess it up, and now it's on 90% good enough because I messed with it. So yeah, I could imagine a lot of people just being happy leaving that be.
Because remember, BVMs, as long as we're talking about BVM, you can load the factory original information from that ISR card into the module. And you can put it back to the day it left the factory. That's what it's going to be. However, if you don't recap it, that reload is not going to be accurate. You can take it back to the original, but other things have deteriorated over the years.
So it's not going to match. So for somebody that wanted to try this themselves, that have the skills to do so, to order the cap kits, to recap the boards, and then would you recommend the next step be to do the factory reset since everything
always
is back to?
Yeah, after you recap or get a module that's recapped, you definitely, if you haven't done it with the ISR module already, you want to take that information and load it into those new modules, or vice versa, load the modules into the ISR. Absolutely, you have to do that.
Okay. And this is just a silly maintenance question, but you made a statement about the first card being the ISR. I've seen some monitors where the very first card is the input board. Does that make a difference? Which slot which card has?
No, every BVM, the very first slot is the ISR module.
Okay.
That's the slide-in card that has the DB9 connectors on it that are normally remote access, or that's where you daisy chain your monitors.
So it must be that the BVMs that have that built in where it's not removable are the ones I'm thinking of then.
The only ones I can think of that do that are some of the D series, the BVM D14s. Those don't have a ISR card, I think. Now you're getting me asking. I'm not sure now. At any rate,
if it's not built in, make sure it's number one.
It's the number one slot. Yeah. And most people don't count that as a slot when they're counting slots, because the most slots you can have in a BVM is 6, and one of them is the ISR card, number 1. Number 6 is always the video card, the RGB card or the component card.
wonder if over the years in my testing, I've thought a monitor was bad because I had the cards in the wrong slot.
Could have.
We've never thrown one out. I just moved it to a different pile to be worked on.
I know a lot of people have problems with the BKM 24N, the NTSC card for composite and S-video, only because they failed to load the ISR card into the 24N. They hook it all up and it doesn't work well. The color's screwy, it wiggles and all kinds of problems. It's because it's set up for another monitor, not the one they plugged it in.
Oh.
So you have to go to the maintenance and you have to reload that particular input card and load the software into it. Then you're fine.
Interesting.
Yeah, whenever you take a module or a card out of another monitor and stick into your monitor, make sure you reload it.
I guarantee I've forgotten to do that at least once or twice. Now you got me. Now you got my wheels turning, thinking, which card from which monitor do I have sitting there right now? So
yeah,
I've
had people send me cards that are perfectly good, yet when they get them, they don't work. And I say, okay, go here, go to maintenance, go to reload, and oh, it works.
The other thing, when you have an ESR meter sitting here, is there? So I have extensive electronics experience and at the same time none, because depending on what projects I've worked on. And when I've used an ESR meter, it's been from capacitors that were removed from circuit, or if I have two of the identical boards sitting there where I know this one's good, so I'll just match them in circuit. Is there part of the service manual that tells you anything like that, or would you really need, side by side?
Kind of an experience thing. I use an analog ISR meter. ESR meter, excuse me. I'm always mixing
ISR
those two.
card,
ESR, blah, blah, blah. At any rate, the ESR, equivalent series resistance, I use an analog meter. I know what those numbers mean as far as from past experience, where it would be. On the scale, it says that a 10 microfarad capacitor should read 10 or more on the scale. That's fine. The problem is, that doesn't make it good.
That's a good point.
If you checked a new 10 mic at 50 volt, you would see that it read over 100, or maybe as high as 400 or 500.
Oh, really?
So, are you going to say that because it checks 10 that it's good? That's not true. ESR is the biggest problem with capacitors. If you have enough capacitors with bad ESR, all your values are really off. The capacitance is okay, but the resistance is too high. So what you end up with is a bad circuit overall, because the capacitor's ESR is in the toilet. It's just not good. So from experience, I go over several things. Like a 47 mic is the biggest failure capacitor that Sony uses. The average reading on those is probably 200 or 300 on my scale. I replace them if they don't read at least 800. So if they're not up to snuff, I pull them out.
Oh, wow.
So, you can say, okay, well, in my reading, it's okay. Problem is, I had a digital ESR meter, and I never could figure it out. It was not accurate. It would read a number on one test. I'd turn around and test it again, and it would be a different number. It was never consistent.
Yeah, I've had ESR meters that did that. I bought a cheap one on eBay, and I used it twice and threw it out.
Forget it.
Would do more harm than good.
I think I have 2 or 3 of them. There's another one.
Oh yeah.
And I always keep a spare on all my equipment. I can't stand to have something break. But ESR meter tells you the story. At the same time, whenever I replace it, I always pull out my capacitance meter after I've replaced it, and I check the old one. And it's amazing to me how you can have a capacitor that has horrible ESR. I mean, so bad it hardly registers, but the capacitance check great. So, why does that happen? And I don't know. I don't know why.
That's interesting. But now at least through experience, you realize that you need to check both in certain scenarios if you're chasing
Absolutely.
a problem.
I do that just normally. Yeah, capacitors are tough, and the only thing you can do is with experience, really.
Mm-hmm.
The more times you've tested something, the more times it's more accurate.
Mm-hmm.
You know what to look for and where it's at. But one thing I'm very critical of is the voltage. Mm-hmm. Whenever I see a circuit that consistently has bad capacitance, if you analyze the circuit, they've got 16 volt caps in a 15 volt circuit. That's fine, but you're right at the edge. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the specs on a capacitor, most even surface mount caps, they're going to say 47 mics, 16 volts, very low ESR, fine. Temperature, 105 degrees C, fine. Life, 5,000 hours. 5,000 hours is all you expect to get out of a brand new capacitor? And the reason is that 5,000 hours is at 105 degrees C. These don't run at 105 degrees C.
Right.
So they're much cooler, much longer list. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, the factory, and I believe that when you have a 15 volt circuit and a 6 volt or in a 16 volt cap, change it and go up to 25. Mm-hmm. Just for fun. You know the baby's going to not have a problem with voltage. And because the capacitor is a higher voltage, when they build the capacitor, the insulation material in between the film itself is thicker, mm-hmm. because that's what partially makes for the voltage. So a higher voltage cap is always the benefit. Mm-hmm. The only problem you run into is then its size sometimes.
Physical space.
Right. If you got a tight spot, mm-hmm. and then you got to be more careful with it.
Many of us in the game console repair world do the same thing, where as long as there's the physical space, you know, if you have a 16 volt cap in there, put the 24 in, because the worst possible thing that could happen is nothing. So,
right.
In my opinion, there's no reason not to do anything like that in those scenarios.
And keep in mind, in power supply situations, capacitance is really not a factor. Mm-hmm. If you got a 47 microfarad cap, you can put in 100 if the space would allow it. It's not going to hurt the circuit. So. You don't have to be quite so perfect. As long as the capacitance is a little higher and the voltage is a little higher, you can go for it.
Very cool. So, many of us who want to find these monitors and want to, just because of the age, and because most people can't afford to buy one already refurbished, you find the junk bin monitors and you try to fix them up. And some of my friends have had some excellent luck with that. They'll show up with a truck, and many places say, we'll only sell all the monitors, not one, because we need them out. So I've had a few friends who have a lot of experience go pick them all up, and out of 20 monitors, get 17 completely refurbished, and they go to the right places. They go to gaming centers, museums. We have a few of those getting in there. So, are there any other basic tips, or maybe questions that you get asked all the time, that are common things that you tell people? So obviously, the capacitors and check the power board. But are there other things, like if there's scratch on the screen, do you recommend removing the
film?
The film, is that the proper? I've heard it screen protector, film.
Well, it's anti-glare.
The anti-glare. Okay.
And it is, to some extent, a screen protector. Mm-hmm. Not all monitors have it. A lot of colorists that do this for a living, that do film, they remove it automatically because they want a more accurate color. So the color, like the monitor you see behind you right now, is pretty accurate. If we had the film on it, if you just hold it up there, you can see what it does to it.
So I'm looking at Sonic the Hedgehog looking amazingly flawless on a 14L5. Right. And I'm looking now at film that, I do realize that it's been out now for a little while, but even the parts of it that are clean kind of look like a not perfectly clean window. So that's what you're looking through, is essentially, something that's taking away from the what's actually being displayed on the glass.
It's like wearing sunglasses. The colors are going to change a little bit, But at any rate, pulling off the film is a good idea in some cases. Others, if you got kids throwing stuff at your screen, you kind of probably want to leave it on. But not all monitors have it. Keep that in mind too. D24s don't have a film.
Oh.
D32s don't have a film. So D20s, F1s, 14Ls, 20L5s all do. So, and the only way to really verify it is to pull the bezel off and look at the screen, and you can see the film edge that you grab onto to peel it off. But,
what's the best way you recommend to clean a tube with and without the film? Is it, I'm assuming Windex and a paper towel.
Without the film, anything.
Okay.
It's just glass. You're not going to hurt it. With the film, I know the factory says be careful because you can scratch the film or there'll be some chemical reactions with some cleaners. I haven't found that.
No.
I happen to use automotive window cleaner because it's ammonia free.
Doesn't streak.
And so I give it one squirt and a good wipe down, and that really does it. So I think just don't use something abrasive, bottom line. But with glass, it's easy to clean.
With any monitor that has scratches, assuming the film is off, so whether it's a D24 without it or you pulled it off, if there's glass with a little tiny crack or a scuff or something in there, is that even something worth replacing, or is that just something to live with?
Well, I've had people say that they have gone to these glass repair, windshield repair guys, and some people have actually buffed out some of these glass scratches.
Oh, wow.
But it leaves a little distortion, if you will, right where they've effectively smoothed it out, because they have to grind it down to get the scratch out, and it's not going to be perfectly flat from then on. So no, once you get a scratch in the glass, not the film, but the glass, the tubes, it's done.
On my D32, I have a very tiny, maybe a crack scratch in the glass, and I'm kind of a perfectionist with this stuff. Like, if I see something wrong, it takes away from the experience, and I could barely notice it. I mean, even the only time I even know it's there is when it's an all-white screen, and even then, I'd have to be looking for it. It's not something I would normally just see. So,
have you done the calibration on your D32 yourself?
No, I have not. To be honest, I was nervous to do it. It's such a rare monitor, and it looks good enough for now. But I had planned on eventually making sure to probably send all the modules to you, to be honest with you. But I've had experiences before with CRTs that when you move them, sometimes I don't know if I would describe it as the calibration changes, but sometimes it's different. And I have mine on wheels now. I live in Manhattan in an apartment, so everything has to be on wheels and movable. And so I guess that's the perfect time to ask this question. If I were to have that calibrated and have something like that on wheels, is that going to, every time I turn it on, I wheel it from one corner of the room to the other, face it in a different direction, is that something that's going to change the way it looks? Because with arcade machines, sometimes you do see a difference. And I even sent one from New York to Utah. And when it arrived, the person was very cool and understanding. He said, hey, you showed me pictures of this, videos. I know it was perfect when you shipped it, but there's a purple tint. And it turns out that, because of the magnetic field of the Earth, it was all the way on the different. He said he ended up rotating it around a few times, then using a wand, and it went away in about a day. For things like just moving it on wheels across a house or an apartment, do you ever see things like that, or is it really just calibrate it and you're fine?
No, you do see things like that. And the larger the monitor, the more pronounced it is. Smaller monitor, like the little 14 behind you right now, you can move that back and forth and you see nothing. You take one of these 20 inchers and do it, and you'll see a little bit. You take the 24 or the 32 and you see it a lot. And it only affects the white balance. So like your D32, you have in the menu, you can immediately go there and take all of those discolorations out. not necessarily that happens on other monitors. You can do it to a certain extent on the D24. You can't really do it on the F1s or the D20s. But repeated use, I'm talking about each day or each whatever, repeated use of turning it off and on activates the degaussing circuit, and it pretty well degausses it, and that it'll slowly go away. But each time you move it, you're right back to that situation where it's been remagnetized.
Okay.
But again, it's usually only on it's the white balance that affects everything. It's going to be a slight discoloration in one of the corners.
So if somebody has a setup with the monitor on wheels and they have one of those automatic calibration kits, forgetting the model number of it.
Well, you're talking BKM 14L.
There you go, the 14L.
Right, which is the probe.
They should calibrate that in the position where it's going to be when they use it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So if they store it in a corner, but they always have it in front of their couch when they're watching or playing, then just make sure to calibrate the white balance there.
Exactly.
Great,
right.
Great tip.
Yep. Yeah, D24s and D32s are wonderful monitors. They are fantastic. And I'm shocked that you haven't done all the geometry and the convergence on it yet.
Well, mine is excellent. So there aren't problems. So I've seen, I mean, not as many as you, of course, but I've seen so many of these monitors that I'll walk up to it, and as I'm 10 feet away getting closer, I could spot 10 things that need fixing, and I don't have that on mine at all. I'm sure it could be tweaked to be better, but there's nothing about it that I immediately see and go, oh, it's just driving me crazy. I have to fix it.
But it drives me crazy that I hear about a D32 that isn't perfect, because the D32 is the one monitor that you can make perfect.
Really?
And I mean perfect.
Oh, wow.
If you want to take the time. I use a 10 by loop. And I go to each dot on your D32. And you can shift the blue, the red, and the green dot. And you can bring them together perfectly.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that.
And then you do it all with the BKM 10R.
Oh, with
one's
the control
one's going to
module.
be red, one's going to be blue, one's going to be green, one's going to be shift. So each one is going to move it up and down, left and right, up and down, left and right.
Wow, that's incredible.
And you can go, and you start in the corner, and you do each dot.
I
mean,
never
it
realized.
takes you hours.
I would have to, yeah.
But when you get, and keep in mind, you have 4 screens on a D32.
I don't think I've ever heard this.
Yeah, you have a 16:9. You have a 16:9 underscan. You have a 4:3 and a 4:3 underscan. You probably aren't using the 4:3 and the 16:9 underscan.
Right.
People rarely do. But everybody uses the 16:9 and the 4:3. So you have to do those two separately.
Wow.
As you have to do the geometry separately. Once you set the geometry for your 16:9, it's not the same as on 4:3. So, at any rate,
yeah, that's you're blowing my mind here.
By doing that, you can sit there and you can spend the time. When I do a D32, and I know how to do it fairly quickly, and it still takes me about 4 hours just to do the convergence.
Wow.
And minutes after that to do the rest of it. I mean, as far as calibrating. But once you get to it, you step back, and the picture is so nice.
Yeah.
You start drooling.
See, a few friends of mine have been able to take consumer-grade TVs and either take the tubes out and repurpose them for arcade use or do an RGB mod for gaming purposes. And I've personally seen some tubes look, I mean, shockingly good that came out of a low-end consumer-grade TV. But one of the most common things I see, and maybe my eyes are just sensitive to red, but I'll see the red be off to the side. So it's
misconvergence.
Yeah, the convergence is off from that. And I guess on just a consumer-grade TV, there's no way to go back and fix that. So the thought of doing that on my D32 is pretty incredible.
Yeah. Like I say, you can make that bottom right-hand corner or the bottom left-hand corner look just as good as the center. It's amazing.
Yeah, that is not common for any of those arcade monitor consumer-grade TVs.
Not at all.
I can't tell you how many that are in arcades that I know of right now that look great in the middle, but
right.
The farther out to the edges you get, the blurrier they get.
Yep.
Wow, that is so cool. I honestly never knew that. So when you're calibrating for geometry, does that calibration go across each input?
No, it goes across each screen.
Each screen.
Each of your 4 screens.
So then if you, can you program different calibration settings for different inputs? So,
Sort of. There's a way around that. You have obviously almost 90 input available.
right.
91 through 99 are test. But you can make, let's say you have a game, RGB, and it's beautiful. It's wonderful. You like it. The size is good. Everything is good. You leave that alone. Now let's say you have another game, and when you put it on, it's shifted right, it's shifted left, it's up, it's down, it needs to be worked on. The geometry's not good. The geometry's good, but it's not good for that game. What I suggest doing is then go to 4:3 underscan and redo the sizes, which you're not going to use anyway, and widen the picture, raise the picture, change the geometry, move the whatever, and then make that channel 2 as an example, that you know that particular game is on channel 2.
That's a great idea.
Then you, of course, you're going to have 16:9, which you can crush. You have underscan on 16:9, you can crush or expand or whatever you want to do. You really have 4, no more than 4.
That is a great idea. What I've been doing for my 20-inch is that the console, I like playing with the electronics more than I like playing with the consoles. But when I do, it's I'll take a Super Nintendo that's 224 by 256. I might be getting those numbers wrong. So if you have one that's calibrated to 320 by 240, obviously it's a little bit off. And I'll just go into the settings and make it wider.
Sure.
And then when I'm done, I'll load up the next one. If the next one doesn't look good, I'll squish it back because, at least to my eyes, it doesn't seem to throw anything that much farther off. And if it does, I just go back into the built-in settings and set it. But it doesn't. It's not like a pincushion effect or anything. It's just vertical and horizontal size, and it doesn't throw the whole monitor off. So
keep in mind, you have the color setting, and you have a regular, and you have color 1 and color 2. So you do have some color options on those 4 inputs, let's say. So color or channel 1, you could have color 2. You could adjust the colors to make it that and record that in on that channel, but then go to channel 2 and you might want a different tint for whatever reason. So you have 3 color choices on 4 channels.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Now you're making me want to go and just play with all of my monitors. So when I first got here, you and I were chatting about the different tubes that were in this, and I didn't realize that's how it worked with the tube assembly. So I don't know if you wouldn't mind kind of going over that again.
Sure. What we were talking about was the 20-inch CRTs that range anywhere from 800 lines, 900 lines, 1,000 lines, and what actually is the difference? Well, in all honesty, it is the same tube. There are better grades. There's super grade and there's regular grade tubes, and the difference is that these were the premium tubes that came off the assembly line. These were the best, and those are the 1,000 line tubes. Not quite so good are 900 line tubes, and the regular ones that made all the specs are 800 line tubes. But they're all the same number, and that includes the tube in a PVM 20M4, a PVM 20L5, a BVM 20F1, a BVM 20E1, a BVM D20, a BVM D20F1, D20E1, an A20. Yes, I think that's it. That's all that, and they use the same CRT, so you can switch. You can play musical chairs with the CRTs, and I'll almost guarantee that you could not tell the difference in the picture when you get through.
So I've had, actually, per your recommendation, I had an A-series BVM without the expensive input card.
68X.
Yep. And a friend of mine that I got to know had a D-series BVM with a very worn tube. And he ended up buying the monitor off of me and doing the tube swap to it. And then now he ended up with an A series with an old tube with composite video input. It was perfect for composite video consoles. And he then had a D series with I think it had 2,600 hours.
Oh, fantastic.
So it was, he was very, very pleased. So for the few E-Series that are out there that are supposed guaranteed 1,000-line tubes, if you have a chassis that's not working, whether it's the input cards, the power, whatever else, can you swap that into a D-Series and get that high 1,000-line performance out of it, or is it the electronics programmed different?
It never had 1,000 lines.
Mm-hmm. It never actually had 1,000 lines?
Most of it's advertising.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to have a D20 with a 1,000-line tube.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to see any difference at all. It's going to be exactly the same.
Very interesting. I've taken picture comparison of tubes before, and the two biggest differences I notice are age of the tube, and if the calibration's way off, whether that be capacitors or just somebody calibrated it wrong. But the age of the tube has always been the biggest factor between BVMs. Of course, you could take a consumer-grade Sony with 400 or less lines and compare it to it, and it's a very noticeable difference once in the picture comparisons, maybe not up front. But
well, keep in mind also when you're doing this tube switching, in some cases you can switch the tube and use the same yoke. Most cases you can't. In other words, the yoke that's in the D20 is not the same as in the A20. So when you switch tubes, you're going to have to switch yokes. As soon as you switch yokes, you're changing all the magnetics involved in the tube. So you're going to have to go through a whole lot of other adjustments to make the tube really good.
Interesting.
It's not a one-for-one swap, in other words.
So if you end up doing a tube swap, you have to really go through the full calibration to make sure you're getting the most out of it.
You first thing you do is you look at the part number that's on the yoke and make sure it's the same part number on the one that you're changing for.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can pull the tube out, leaving the yoke attached and all the rings mounted. You can pull it right out and slide it right in, and it's going to fire right up. You're going to have minor adjustments from there. But if you have to change yokes, a whole different story. You just added another hour to the service, or more.
I mean, yeah. If you don't have experience, guaranteed more.
Yeah.
One question I get all the time from people that really want to get into these is and it's such a general question, but what's the best RGB monitor you'd recommend? And my answer is always, it's a complicated answer. You can't just say one, because...
Yes, you can.
What do you
BVM D32.
Yeah, right. What is a monitor you can actually purchase? You can have that.
Okay.
And for me, the 20M2U PVMs are incredibly common still. And from my video game experience, not TV world, they seem to be built like tanks. They accept, when I say every signal, I don't mean 480p. I mean all of the weird refresh rates of certain arcade boards or video game consoles. They're pretty durable, and you could at least get them reasonably priced. Unfortunately, they don't have removable input cards, so you do have to take it apart to do the capacitor replacement. But then I say, I always use the analogy of, like, if you want a really fast car, you can go buy a Corvette, just change the oil, it'll last forever. But if you want a Lamborghini, there's a lot of tweaking constantly involved, and the BVMs are like the Lamborghini. How far off are those analogies? Am I on the right track? Would you agree, disagree?
Well, no, I think the BVMs they're certainly much more easy to work on than the PVMs are across the board.
Is it simply because of the fact that it's a removable card, or they're just...
Exactly.
Okay.
From my experience, I can look at a picture and I can tell you which card needs service. So I can go to that card, service it, slide it in, baby's working.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that with a 20M4 or 20M2.
Mm-hmm.
You got to take it apart. You got to disassemble the whole damn thing.
Mm.
You got to pull the circuit board. You got to unconnect everything. So you got a half hour in disassembly right off the bat before you've done anything.
Mm-hmm.
The bottom line is you put it back together. It has the same tube, a 20M4 as a D20, for that matter, but you'll never calibrate the corners. You'll never get the geometry exactly right. It'll always be a little tweaked on the ends, on the edges. You'll never get convergence exactly right on the corners of the tube. That's also true of the 20M2, which is the same thing with a different tube.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The 20M2 has got the dark-faced tube, where the 20M4 doesn't. But that's essentially the difference. One's a 600-line tube, one's an 800-line tube. So the 20M2s and 20M4s, no, they're not as good. But they're cheaper.
Right.
They're getting a little more expensive.
Yes.
I'm surprised they're now going for, what, $400 or $500 for an M4, M2, whatever.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that range.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the best overall monitor is probably the D20.
Mm.
It used to be cheaper. Now they're getting more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're $1,500 plus.
Mm-hmm.
Only because it does everything. It'll go from 240 all the way to 1080i.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the good part. As far as a nice monitor, I still like the 20F1U. That's still my favorite monitor, only because it's halfway between the D20 and the D32 as far as calibration and adjusting for convergence. You have a lot more ability on the F1 on convergence than you do the D20.
Oh, really?
So I prefer, convergence-wise, in calibration, I prefer the F.
So the exact model number is the BVM 20F1U?
Correct.
Not D20F1U?
D20FU is the same thing as an F1U, only it's got high def.
480p. Yeah, or higher, right, yeah.
It does high def, where the 20F1 is only going to do 240 and 480. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
It's done. But the adjustments that it has for convergence are better than the D20.
Wow. So even though this, like we have sitting here, D20F1U doesn't have as many convergence options as just the plain old 20F1U.
Correct.
Wow, I never realized that.
Right. So that doesn't mean that this is going to have a less of a good picture than the F1, or the F1's going to have less of the D. It means that it can't be made as good. So it may be good right out of the bag. Mm-hmm. So, hey, you don't have to worry about anything. It's working great. The convergence, the calibration is great. But if it's off a little bit, the 20F1 you can tweak. So I really prefer the F1U.
Interesting. Can you still find any of these anywhere anymore, or is it just really just look at eBay and hope
they keep popping up? You're familiar with Nick, the guy that has the store out here in Huntington Beach that sells so many monitors?
Which store is that?
I forgot the name of his company now.
There is one person I always see in Huntington Beach selling BVMs.
Right. Okay, that's him. His name is Nick. Mm-hmm. A young man, 23, 24 years old, a real entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And he now has, I think, about 500 monitors in stock.
Oh, wow.
He just bought 300. They just arrived last week. The week before, he had 200 or 300 come in, or a few weeks before that, he had several hundred come in. Mm-hmm. And this is across the board. Mm-hmm. All sizes, all types, got everything. And these all came from a rental place in Las Vegas. So, which is great. I recommend that anybody that can buy a monitor from a rental place, do it.
Because it probably has less overall hours than a studio that left it on 24/7.
Chances are it's probably a little more beat up as far as the handles or the case or the whatever. But sometimes they come in cases and they're in great shape. But overall they have lower hours, and that's the key. Some of them do their own service, which could be good and it could be bad. The smaller rental places use Sony service, which is good, pretty good. And some of the guys that do their own, maybe not so good, but overall they're usually good buys. He has a lot of monitors.
I believe he usually lists them for $1,500 and up.
Yeah, but he's got a big investment. He's in the last several months, I think he's spent over $100,000 on monitors.
Wow.
So he's in business. He's doing what he's doing.
Got to make money.
The biggest problem.
If he's calibrating those before?
He does not.
Okay.
He does nothing to them other than ship them. Right now I have 1, 2, 3 that belong to him. These are a customer has bought one of these monitors and is paying Nick an extra for me to service them, which I'm doing. So then I give them back to Nick, and Nick ships them. And that's where the problems arise.
Yeah, I was just going to say, shipping terrifies me. I had a friend who works at a shipping company, two shipped out, a 14 M2U that arrived in perfect condition, and a 20 M2U that was pretty much, the case was destroyed. We were able to, the metal was bent in, touching a circuit board. We were able to bend that back out, fired right up, looked perfect still, but the little handles on the front of the M series, those are metal, and those snapped that it got dropped so hard. So
well, those are, unfortunately, they're screwed in from the rear, just in plastic, and the plastic breaks very easily.
But it was heartbreaking. That was one that was just been fully restored by somebody that took the time to really do it as best as he could, did a great job. And so I guess, do you recommend people buy, or at least purchase and then ship back any of the flight cases that come with it?
Well, obviously the roller cases are the best way to ship a monitor. A couple of reasons. Number one, they're foam all around the inside, so they'll take a fair amount of banging, if you will. Personally, my experience has been about 2.5 years ago, I stopped shipping via FedEx and UPS. I refused to do it. It got to the point where 50% of whatever I was shipping was coming through broken. And all that's because of FedEx and UPS's upgrade to automation. They now take them off the truck, they roll them or push them or slide them onto the conveyor. The conveyor runs along, they drop 6 feet down and then go on another conveyor, drop 6 feet down. And then they get on a truck, and I'll never ship to New York again. I know what happened the last time I shipped a 20 F1U that was perfect, had 3,000 hours on it. Shipped it to a guy, and he says he looked outside when the UPS guy came up, and he pushed it out the back of the truck on the ground. Oh no! And it came through, busted the CRT.
That's heartbreaking.
Tell me about it. That's what I complain about, is you're breaking or destroying a non-source. You can't get another one like that. They're gone forever.
I'd feel bad if somebody took a new TCL TV and did that, where you could go, oh, that stinks, and then press a button on Amazon, and the next day it appears. But that, you can't, there's a finite number of these left in the world.
So if you're going to ship by FedEx or UPS, several hints. Take it to a FedEx or UPS store and let them pack it and ship it. It's probably 50-50 it's going to get destroyed. But you're fully insured. They can't argue about the claim because they packed it. And keep in mind that FedEx or UPS doesn't pay the claim. The franchisee that shipped it for you is the one that has to pay. So after you do it a few times, they kind of back away because they don't want to ship it anymore. They know what's going to happen. But a couple of hints. Number one, you have to use double wall boxes. You have to use 2 boxes. You have to use lots of rubber or foam or padding or something, at least 2 inches worth, all the way around the monitor.
So I would assume definitely not bubble wrap, foam and
rubber. You can use bubble wrap all the way around, but
okay.
Then make sure it's in a box that's inside of a box. If you don't do that, believe me, UPS and FedEx is the same thing. The very first time you file the claim, they're going to ignore it. They're going to say, no, we decline the claim for whatever reason. But if you do the double box and make sure the boxes say on them that they're good for the weight that you have included. The boxes I use for the 20Fs and the Ds and the As, they're all 95 pounds internal. That's the weight of what's in the box. Even though it says 150 or 250 pounds on the box, that's the breaking weight, but the internal weight. UPS and FedEx gets very snippety about that.
That's a good tip.
One of the things that they say, okay, we don't have to pay because you put it. Don't ever use a used box. They can decline the claim because it's a used carton.
Oh wow! I'd never.
That's right. That's another sticker. And Because believe me, they have all kinds of ways to deny the claim. That's what they're professionals at.
I'm still fighting insureship from almost 6 months ago from that 20M2U. It's brutal. Every time they say they're gonna, all right, we'll send a letter out, and then 3 weeks go by and they never sent anything. I have to go to them. They're not in business to hand money to people. They're in business to take money from people. So
I've been servicing more monitors of late than I have been selling them. And part of the reason is shipping. It's just become a headache. What I have shipped, in the last few monitors I've shipped have come through 100%, but I'm doing it a different way. I'm putting them in a box, one double wall box, completely wrapped in bubble wrap. I then strap it in the box to a pallet. Okay, a wooden pallet, 4x4.
Okay.
Or 3x4. I then put it in the back of my pickup truck, and I take it down to the main truck depot. I use a particular carrier, and they come with a forklift and they take it off my truck, and it goes on to another truck, and it goes to the depot in the city where I'm shipping it to. So it would go to New York City. The customer then drives down to that depot. They take it off the truck and put it on the ground, and that's his.
So palleted shipping they take more seriously.
Right. Well, it doesn't get tipped over, it doesn't get rolled, it doesn't get dropped.
Right.
All those things happen.
That's a great hint.
But it's twice the price of FedEx and UPS. But it gets there. I use a company called Moveit, Moveit, and they're in Iowa, and they're a freight forwarder. Very nice people. I call them, tell them the size, the weight, height, width, whatever. He says, okay, that's $205 to go from here to New York. Great. He sends me an invoice. I pay it with my credit card right on the computer, and he sends me the labels. And bam, I slap the labels on, and I'm done. I take it down to the depot.
That's great.
If you can't do it that way, then they will do it. They will charge you extra, and they will come and pick it up. They will charge you extra if you want it delivered. Both of those things cost money. And to me, it's crazy, because if you have to drive down to pick it up, you know that it was handled correctly. If it goes on another truck, comes to you, the chances of it dropping off the back of another truck are high. So I don't recommend the home delivery. Go get it.
Years ago, I was able to score a Luva Articos TV. I'm not sure if you'd ever heard of those, but the high-end fancy shops were selling them for $5,000. I got it for $2,000 just because it's the right place at the right time. And they palleted it and shipped it, and I had to go pick it up and lift the 200-pound monitor. I had to remove, take apart the pallet right there in the parking lot, lift it in the back of my truck there by myself, but it arrived perfectly. Then the people that I shipped it to said, if that's how we recommend everything. They said if it was UPS, that would have never survived.
No, you cannot ship a monitor today. You could ship a 14-inch today, because you can just pack the bejesus out of it, and it'll probably get there. And you can tell when it gets there, the box is no longer a box. It's close to a ball. All the corners are crushed in. You can because they don't pick them up anymore. They roll them. And
it's a shame.
Yeah, it's horrible. But that's why I don't ship as many monitors. I don't buy as many. It's such a hassle.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at the end of the day, I would have rather spent an extra $100 going through a pallet shipper than waste all these hours arguing. So. Yep.
And a lot of companies, depending on where you're going and where it's from, they'll supply the pallet to you. And some of them will even wrap it for you right at the depot. So, wrap it in foil. I use straps. I strap it down to the pallet.
So, when you're carrying a monitor, for people that need to move them, whatever else, is there any kind of rule of thumb? If many times just because of the width, I would pick it up and then it would be tube facing the ceiling, and I would walk with it that way. I've seen people do it the opposite, where the tube is facing the floor as they're walking, which I don't think is good, because then
they're made to put the screen in your belly. If you notice the handles and the way they're built, the handles and the grooves are the balance point. So if you put it in your belly, it's not going to get scratched. That's the main thing when you're carrying it. Yeah.
So is there absolutely a do not do? Is there something that,
Well, never lay them on their back. That's what you never want to do.
On their back, meaning where the inputs are?
Yeah. Yeah, never lay them that way. Nick just shipped a 20L5, and the shipper shipped it back down.
Oh.
Face up.
What happened?
Thought he wanted to save the face.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when it got there, if you know a 20L5 is just a plastic back, it had crushed and busted the CRT right in half. Just took the neck right off.
Oh, all right. So that's just for weight distribution and strength. It's not because the tube shouldn't be like
It's
that.
for safety, because now you don't have that problem with BVMs and PVMs because it's covered up. But the PVMs, you got to be careful, like these 20L5 and 14L5.
Mm-hmm. The plastic backs, yeah.
Those crush, and the first thing it does, it takes out the C-board, the 20L5, 14L5 C-board, cracks those, and busts the neck of the tube off. Mm. You're lucky if it doesn't break the tube.
That's terrifying.
But the 20L5 and 14L5, that's the biggest fault. That's also the part that goes bad the most. There's a resistor and a IC on those boards that goes bad and shuts the monitor down.
So I guess there's, I don't know if it's a myth because I've heard both, but some arcades have the monitor vertically, so it's on a side. Mm-hmm. Is there any downside to that?
No, not at all.
I never thought so either. It didn't seem to make any difference.
They'll operate in any configuration. If you notice, like on the even that monitor right there, there's no ventilation anywhere except on the top. They just want the hot air to escape. Mm-hmm. If you turn it this way, the hot air is going to hit the roof or the side. It's still going to exit out the side. So,
but as long as you install a fan as you recommended, then
I recommend a fan no matter what. Yeah, if you want to keep it long term, this is your forever monitor, and you don't want to service it. Fan's the way to go.
So I've been working with some museums in the past year that are just now starting to realize how important this stuff was. It's kind of funny because it's just like the classic car reference. 10 years ago, they were looking to get rid of all these things, and now they're realizing, we need to make sure to preserve a lot of the better ones. So all the tips that you gave, replace the capacitors, add the fan. Other than the D32, of course, are there any that you would really like to see in museums for people to be used as, showing the best example of what a CRT could have been, or was at one time?
No, not really. No, nothing comes to mind.
Just get a good quality BVM or 20-inch BVM maybe, and try to get some of the larger ones in there, and that way it's just the best example of what you can get from a CRT.
I still, again, overall, I think the 20F1U is still the best monitor. I think for gamers, probably the D20 is a little better because it does 480p.
Well, for a lot of gamers, 480p doesn't come into play. So
right.
For anything pre-96.
Some. That's why I say some. Yeah. And the people that want HD, the D20 gives it all. But for the normal 240, 480 guy, F1's the best deal.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm going to hunt one of those down as well. For those smaller CRTs, the 8-inch ones, I see all the time, and I have had good luck shipping those. You could, that's much different. You're talking about magnitudes of difference in weight. Have you any recommendations for those? I know a lot of people that would like a little test monitor, or just are they decently good quality or?
Well, there's 2 picture tubes in 8-inch monitors. All 8-inch monitors. There's only 2 tubes. The standard tube is a 250 line tube, and the best tube is a 500 line tube. No, it's not 500 line. Maybe it is 450 lines. I'm sorry. We're going back. It's been a while. 250 and 450. The 8040, which is the basic 8-inch model. The 8041 is the one with all the knobs and all the buttons. That's 250 lines. The 8042 is 250 lines, but it has more buttons on it. The 8043 MD is the same thing, but it's cream colored and it's the medical version. The 8044 is the 450 line model.
Okay.
and the 8045 is the 450 line model. And that's the best one. The PVM 8045Q or BVM 8045Q. They made them both. Same monitor. Just one had BVM, one had PVM. Same insides. But the 8045Q was the best one.
I believe I had one of those. It was great.
Nice sharp when you crunch 450 lines down to 6.5, 6 3/4 inches, which is actually what it is. They're not anywhere near 8 inches. But anyway, you cram it down that size, it's a fantastic picture.
That's cool.
Yeah.
The ones that were labeled 9-inch, that's just the same thing.
That's BS.
Right?
Same tube.
Yeah, same tube.
It's like these 800, 900, 1,000 line tubes. Same stuff.
That's
funny. The BVM 9L2 or PVM 9L2 is 250 lines. PVM 9L3 is 450 lines. But they have the ability to use the 9L3 as an example. You can put a SDI card in and an HD SDI card.
I specifically got that one because of its sensitivity to certain signals from consoles. So because it doesn't have VCR mode. So now I have one that could test the different solutions people are coming on.
Okay.
But I think that ended up being almost $400 after I bought the chassis, the cards, the power supply, and all that stuff. So I wouldn't recommend that for your average person, but for people building hardware, that would be the one I would say, because it's cheap, you can ship it easily, and you can test your equipment right on.
Yeah, the PVM 8044Q and 8045Q are the best of the 8-inchers, those two. And then, of course, the 9L3. But the 9L3 you have to have, if you want RGB or composite, you need that BKM 129X card.
Right.
Which is too much money. That's why the 8044 and 45 are better. Use the same tube, and won't do HD. It will do 240 just fantastic.
It's a good recommendation.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, before I go, I do, on behalf of everybody that I work with, want to thank you, because you've been an invaluable source of help and information and a tremendous amount of patience. I've heard stories of, I know some of the people that have called you. I did not give them your number.
I wish you would. I don't mind. I would rather you give them my number than to try to hassle through and tell them how to get to me via my profile, which has my phone number on eBay, or trying to send me a message on eBay's server that I can't answer. As soon as I go to answer it, they kick it right back at me. So I think a lot of people, unfortunately, think of me as a snob because I don't answer them.
No,
but I
absolutely
try.
not.
I try to get back to them, but I can't always get through to them.
No, yeah, I don't think anybody would view you as anything other than the truth. Your reputation precedes you.
Well, that's fine, because I try to help. I really honestly try to help everybody. And I'm not out to make a buck off anybody. If they got a problem, I want to help. If they've got a problem they want to send me, I'm going to charge them for it.
Of course.
But if they just need information, I'm happy to help. I'm almost 80 years old. What the hell? How much longer I got? The monitors are going to last me a lot longer than I am. So.
Well, I wanted to make sure that before I left here that you knew that it was everything that you do is appreciated, but it's also being saved and archived in the right way. A lot of my friends are taking down this information, making videos on how to do it, so that we don't have to worry about 20, 30, 40 years from now. Museums still have these things working, and no one knows how to fix them. As you said before, maybe we don't have the capacitors to fix them, but it's appreciated, and it's not going to in one ear out the other. It's all being, you're the teacher to all of us for these things. You're the BVM professor.
Yeah, right.
So it's much appreciated. Everybody thinks so. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I'm really happy to help people, and when somebody turns around and says, "Oh, hey, it works. Thank you," and I feel good. It makes an old man feel good. Yeah,
well, you're making a lot of other people feel good too.
Well,
so
that's good.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Pat. Hopefully I get out to LA, once a year ish. So hopefully I get to see you again, and I'll have a long list of other questions.
You're welcome anytime. Anytime.
Thank you very much.